right, again, welcome to our Municipal Separate Storm Sewer Systems Permit Technical Friday. It's a series of in-depth webinars on the first Friday of each month. My name is Mike Pisauro. I'm the Policy Director for the Watershed Institute. Welcome, and hopefully we will have a very informative session today. Just some logistics for our webinar. We are going to record this session. We will be sending you the recording to everyone who has registered, whether you've attended or not. If you're not attending, you're not listening, so that's okay. If you have a question, there is a Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please use that to ask the questions. Participation. And then for whatever reason, the way I have my screen set up, I cannot see the questions. So if you would just keep track of those, I would appreciate it.
Sure.
I'd like to recognize that the land and water now under our care is the traditional and ancestral territory of the Lenni Lenape. We pay respect to the Lenape peoples, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout the Lenape diaspora. We respect their knowledge, culture, and tradition, which have contributed to the conservation of land and water. For those who do not know, we are the Watershed Institute, formerly known as the Stony Brook Millstone Watershed Association. Being safe and healthy is the heart of our mission. We work to protect and restore our water and natural environment in central New Jersey through conservation, advocacy, science, and education. We administer several statewide programs in New Jersey, and this is Technical Friday is one of those advocacy education series that we are doing. We are also doing a monthly Watershed Wednesday, the third Wednesday of each month. So keep your eyes out for that stuff. Our strategies to keep water clean, health, and safety is scientific investigation and monitoring through our science department, advocacy. Environmental education, we have a strong education program that provides preschool through high school and adult education. And we also model some of these best practices on our watershed center in our 950-acre watershed reserve. For example, we have rain gardens, porous pavement, a cistern, and a green roof, among other factors. So you all are here for the MS4. What is that? That is the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer Systems. I'm probably never going to say that whole phrase again. It is what we call an EGIPTES permit. An EGIPTES is the New Jersey Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. It is basically a permit issued by the state of New Jersey, Department of Environmental Protection, for the discharge of pollutants from a point source. So if it comes from a pipe, a ditch, some sort of concrete or discrete conveyance, it is a point source, and it needs, if it is carrying a pollutant, needs a permit. And from a stormwater perspective, the 1987 Clean Water Act amendments, so the Federal Clean Water Act included stormwater as a point source, and then required all the states to start addressing stormwater as a point source. Before 1987, the 1987 amendments, stormwater wasn't really considered a point source. It was considered a non-point source. So sort of a diffuse discharge of pollutants, what you would sort of sheet flow, or just a non-discrete discharge, pollutants running over your land and just sort of flowing into a stream. That's sort of what we all thought of stormwater up until 1987 or so. And then from 1987 onwards, that sort of paradigm switched. And a lot of people consider stormwater or talk about stormwater as non-point source pollution still. Up until recently, DEP put the stormwater program in the non-point source pollution section, but it really is a point source. And from 1987, from those amendments, EPA was then directed to issue Phase 1 permits, which was in 1999. So there's actually two types of MS4 permits, and in New Jersey, there's actually sort of, I guess, three, if you want to think of it that way. Phase 1 was required in 1999 for large and medium municipalities. The important thing to know, in New Jersey, there were no large or medium municipalities that had an MS4 system. You might think Newark, Elizabeth, Paterson, Jersey City may have been large, but they had a combined sewer system, so weren't included in that Phase 1 process. So in 1990, as part of that process, New Jersey didn't have any MS4 systems. In 1999, EPA got ratcheting down and started with the Phase 2 or small municipalities, requiring that the states then control stormwater from these small systems. And roughly a small municipality is one that is classified as an urbanized area according to the 2000 census, of less than 100,000 or not. And these regulations required the states, including New Jersey, to issue an MS4 permit by 2003. So New Jersey in 2003 or 4 proposed and or adopted a couple things. One, the stormwater management rules, the NJAC 7:8 rules that all of us stormwater people are so familiar with. They also issued and created the NJAC 7:14-25, which is a NJIPTES, the NJIPTES section of the water rules, and that is addressing municipal stormwater, and also issued its first MS4 permit. New Jersey took that Phase 2 rules and sort of split that even farther down to a Tier A and Tier B permits. Separated the Phase 2 small municipality MS4s into two. Tier A are, according to New Jersey, municipalities that have 1,000 or more residents as of the 2000 census and are an urbanized area, have a population density of at least 1,000 people per square mile, and at least a population of at least 10,000. Or discharges into saltwaters of Monmouth, Ocean, Atlantic, or Cape May counties. If a municipality requested to be considered a Tier A, or the department determines that those stormwater discharges should be a Tier A. So most of New Jersey municipalities are a Tier A municipality. Tier B is any town not a Tier A. As of the 2018 permit, there was about 33 towns in that Tier B. And there are slightly different standards and requirements than a Tier A municipality. This may change with the new permit that's coming, but I'm not sure what towns are going to be removed from Tier B and go in. So just a bit of history. Not that we haven't been talking about history up to now. New Jersey, 3 MS4 permits. So NJIPTES permits, all NJIPTES permits are 5 years. So our first permit was issued in 2004. Then another one was issued in 2009. You may notice there was a big gap, but in 2018, the next permit was effective. And now we're approaching that 5-year period, and DEP has issued pre-draft for informal comments, which will be adopted and made effective January 1st of 2023, assuming everything goes according to plan. One thing to know about these permits, they still stay in effect even if they have technically expired until a new one is issued. So why do we need MS4 permits? One, under the Clean Water Act, as I mentioned, we had the 1987 amendments, which specifically said stormwater needs to be regulated, but just sort of more of a general background. Stormwater collects pollutants. As rain hits our our land, our parking lots, our roads, our buildings. It picks up a series of chemicals and other substances. Those are pollutants. Also, rain hits pavement. That rain will absorb the heat from those pavement and those other surfaces. Temperature is a pollutant under the Clean Water Act. So even if it picks up nothing else, if you change the temperature of it, it becomes a pollutant. And the Clean Water Act requires a permit for the discharge from a point source of any pollutant. Also, the Clean Water Act, as I mentioned, added directly stormwater. And also sort of, if you think about the goals of the Clean Water Act, the goal of the Clean Water Act was to eliminate discharges of all pollutants by 1985. That may have been a ultimate goal that is probably illusionary. We may never get there because we're quite a bit past that 1985 deadline, but that's sort of one of the driving forces. Another driving force of the Clean Water Act is to restore, maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. So, you know, everything in that Clean Water Act, all of our regulatory programs really should be moving us towards meeting that standard of actually bringing our waters back to a anthropomorphic modifications. And New Jersey adopted a lot of the sort of philosophy behind the Clean Water Act and its Water Pollution Control Act of 1977. Again, that goal of restoring and maintaining chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. So, as I mentioned, you know, stormwater, it picks up pollutants, it becomes a pollutant, and we are discharging it from pipes, ditches, other concrete or discrete conveyances. And we need to regulate and treat it. The other reason we need an MS4 permit is, you know, obviously as we develop our land, less of that water can be infiltrated and retained on site, and we have a flooding problem. This is not news to anybody, but it is a growing problem which we need to continue to address and ratchet down so that we minimize and avoid some of the horrific impacts of flooding. But it's also water pollution. As I mentioned, the goal of the Clean Water Act, the Water Pollution Control Act in New Jersey, is to restore our waters. So New Jersey, as part of the Clean Water Act, releases a report every 2 years on the health of our waterways. It's called the Integrated Report. And one of those sections of the report is called the 303D list. And that is a list of all of the impaired waters in New Jersey. All waters have a designated use, whether it's aquatic life, water supply, recreation, fish consumption, etc. And so DEP monitors and reports out on the health. So this chart you see here is from the 2018-2020 report. We combined two of them to one report. That orange color is not supported. So most of the waters that we monitor in New Jersey, we don't monitor all waters, but we're getting closer and closer to that goal. Most of the waters in New Jersey are not healthy enough for aquatic life. So not healthy enough for a healthy macroinvertebrate population. A lot of our waters aren't meeting water supply standards. A lot of our waterways are not swimmable. So it goes to show we're really a long way from meeting those goals, and why we need to continue to regulate and improve the way we collect, treat, and discharge stormwater. And just to give sort of a trend, this is from the 2010 report, the same kind of report, slightly different way of looking at it, but again, red, not supporting. So from 2010 to 2020, our waterways are at best maybe sort of holding the line, and maybe at worst sort of degrading a bit. It's, you know, as we continue to add waters, it's not necessarily an apples to apples description, but We still have a long way of going of seeing all of those designated uses, the drinking water, recreation, aquatic life, fish meeting all of the standards and fully supporting. So that's why this MS4 permit is so important. One of the biggest factors of current water pollution is the way we handle our land, the way we can collect our stormwater, and the way we discharge it. There's a lot of legacy issues, for when we used to discharge chemicals directly into our waterways without treatment. But by and large, today we're dealing with people pollution, our land use management. So just as a timeline, DEP released the 2023 draft MS4 permit beginning of March, so just about a month ago. It released that for informal comments, which actually are due today. They are then going to formally in the New Jersey Register propose the permit sometime late spring of 2022, where they will accept comments. They will respond to those comments, and then in November of 2022, finalize the permit and issue it. Then that effective, midnight of January 1st, and municipalities will then be operating under the MS4 permit, the 2023 one. And as I mentioned, if there's a little bit of delay, municipalities will be operating under the 2018 permit. So there's a lot in this permit. What I have tried to do, and I'll be frank, I'm still reviewing that permit. I've sort of put out sort of the major components of that permit. Where you see words highlighted in green or in green lettering, those are things that have been changed or added from in this permit and the 2023 proposed permit that were not in the 2018 permit or have been improved since the 2018 permit. So there is a section that basically has I don't want to say boilerplate, but references a bunch of other rules and incorporates those requirements. So they have permit conditions that are applicable to all NJPD's permits. So whether you're a wastewater treatment plant, an industrial facility, or a stormwater facility, these conditions apply to you. They have required all municipalities have a stormwater program, kind of makes sense. And that program is part of, has multiple components. One would be a stormwater pollution prevention plan, a municipal stormwater management plan. That's part of the land use master plan. It's sort of a historic thing. Before New Jersey was required to handle stormwater as an NJPD's permit, New Jersey passed the Stormwater Management Act in 1982 and put that under the municipal land use law. A little bit of history again. Another component of the stormwater program is required to have a stormwater ordinance, which regulates the review and control of stormwater and major developments. A public participation, so an education component for the public and input, soliciting input from the public on these components. A mitigation plan is not necessarily a required component of a stormwater management system, but if municipalities wish to give variances to the stormwater control ordinance, they have to have a mitigation plan. And we've talked about that in prior sessions. In fact, we had a technical Friday in February, all about stormwater mitigation plans. They've added, and this is a new, a stormwater web page. The municipalities are required to now have and maintain on their municipal website. And they also mentioned you have to have a post-construction stormwater management program. And this is, I think, what most people think of stormwater management, the basins, the constructed wetlands, the rain gardens, all of the stormwater management that is put together as a result of development. That's the post-construction stormwater that you see. And I'd like to point this out. It's sort of applies that to major development, which under the stormwater rules at 7:8 of the administrative code are as 1 acre of soil disturbance or a 1/4 acre of impervious, unless additional development is defined. So a municipality, according to the MS4 permit, could change the definition, ratchet it down so it includes more types of development, lower thresholds, and the MS4 permit gives municipalities that authority. And I'm looking at the chat. So DP will continue to accept comments. As I mentioned, today's the deadline. They will continue to accept comments, but the sooner you get them in, the better they can consider them and modify or incorporate those suggestions into the draft, because they are proposing to issue the draft permit for official comment, late spring. So we're early spring, but late spring is rapidly approaching. So, hang on. All right. So, oops. Stormwater page. This is one of those improvements in this permit from past permits. There are some required components of that web page. A lot of municipalities have a stormwater page, and some information has been required to be on the municipal page before in the 2018. But they've sort of set out what's required in that: the stormwater pollution prevention plan, the municipal stormwater management plan, the control ordinance, community-wide ordinances, and I'll talk about that in a few seconds, an outfall map. So since 2004, municipalities have had to map the outfalls. So where all of the stormwater that is being collected in systems are being discharged into our waterways. So that map has to be available so people know where these outfalls are. Added to this is an infrastructure map. This is new. There's a new requirement for the municipalities to map what infrastructure have. Not only the outfalls, but all the pipes, the piping systems, all of the inlets that you see in our streets, all of the stormwater BMPs, all of the rain gardens, infiltration basins, sand basins, all of that system that a municipality owns now has to be put on a map so you could graphically see it. Up until this proposed permit, that hasn't necessarily been required, and that map is now required to be in this, the municipality's stormwater webpage. So the public knows where all this system is. And something called a watershed improvement plan. I probably should have bolded that, highlighted that, put little stars and asterisks. This is a huge improvement, which we'll talk about at some length, but most municipalities will now have this, and that will have to go on the webpage. The community-wide ordinances. So these have been around for a long time. Some of these are being revamped a bit, and there's going to be some additions. So the pet waste. So all municipalities are supposed to have an ordinance requiring you to pick up your dog poo and put it in a bag and dispose of it properly versus leaving it on our streets, our yards. Wildlife feeding, prohibiting the feeding of wildlife, litter control, because that litter will eventually find its way into a waterway. Yard waste, the collection and storage of yard waste. A lot of municipalities will have a couple times a year where they'll come around and pick up leaves or brush. You're not supposed to put that within 10 feet of a stormwater inlet. I go around, and we all do see those leaves piled up right up against the inlet, which then clogs the inlet and increases the amount of nutrients that get into our streams and waterways. The two new ones, salt storage ordinance. So in winter, we obviously need salt or other de-icing materials to put on our roadways. This ordinance will require there's always been a public salt storage has always had been contained so it's not exposed to the elements. This is now going to apply to private facilities. So our office complexes, our malls, what have you, they will sometimes have a big pile of salt right out in the open, exposed to the elements. And that salt, if it gets rained on or snowed on, will get into our waterways. We were going to have a technical Friday. Actually, this one was going to be on salt storage, but that got pushed back all. That's having a major impact on the water quality. So now privately owned facilities now have to make sure that that salt storage is controlled and not being exposed to the elements. A tree ordinance. So a lot of towns already have a tree protection ordinance, but this is going to require, from a stormwater perspective, all towns have it. We all know, and it should come as a surprise, trees drink water, trees drink stormwater. So trees can be an important component of trying to control and address stormwater. So this will be an ordinance. DEP will have model ordinances and municipalities can take and use. They are not out yet, but that is another big one. And a lot of municipalities, like I said, have them. Some municipalities are considering them, but there's some pushback for various reasons. And now this is, municipalities can say, I have to do this, so we're going to do it, and we're going to do it right. So there's community-wide measures. So triennial street sweeping and annual street sweeping. So there's been in prior permits some requirements, and now these are going to be modified. So for municipalities that have roads with inlets, so those storm drains that you see on the road, in the curbs, with those inlets are discharging to a surface water body, municipalities are going to be required to sweep those 3 times a year, so every 4 months. For those streets that don't have inlets but discharge to water bodies, there's only going to be an annual requirement. Get up that sediment, get up that salt. So it minimize the amount that gets into our waterways. Storm drain inlet retrofitting, just so that trash and litter doesn't get into the storm drain. Storm drain installations, make sure those are done right. Herbicide applications, actually, that's sort of modified a bit. Excess de-icing material management. This is another sort of big change. As I mentioned, salt is having an impact on our waterways. And this is going to have, I forget whether it's 24 or 72 hours after a storm event, to go back out and pick up clumps of de-icing materials. So, as those salt trucks stop, turn, sometimes you will see a big clump of salt just deposited. Municipalities will have to go back out, pick that up, so you don't have a huge amount of unnecessary salt or other de-icing material lying there and then washing into our waterways. Roadside vegetative waste management, again, sort of an enhancement. Roadside erosion control, making sure our roads aren't eroding away and impacting our streams. Inspection requirements. And this is one of those things we have always been required to maintain our stormwater systems. One of those things that a good inspection program, maintenance program, can probably get us a long way to meeting water quality and sort of taking some low-hanging fruit and fixing it. So municipalities are going to be required to develop, update, and implement and enforce adequate long-term cleaning, operation, and maintenance of private and public systems. So a lot of municipalities in the 2018 permit, DEP required municipalities to certify that both publicly and privately owned systems were being maintained and operating according to design. And a lot of municipalities adopted ordinances that required some sort of report from these private systems, whether it was annual, quarterly, and how that reporting worked. So that's going to be still there and sort of reinforced. Make sure that there's a program to inspect at least 4 times annually these systems, make sure they're functioning, and after each 1-inch storm. So we want to make sure as these things are being hit with a storm that they're actually functioning, and then if not, making sure they go back and are being maintained so they do function. And again, this applies to privately owned systems. So your homeowners associations, your corporate parks, they all have their stormwater systems. They're supposed to be inspecting and maintaining them. There's what's called an operation and maintenance manual with all of these systems. If you're a property owner that are responsible for these systems, you should have that O&M manual and make sure you're following the inspection and maintenance set out in that manual, or at least annually. So that's in there. MS4 mapping. So this is another sort of big change, and I should have put that in green. As I said, the 2018 permit required municipalities to certify that all these things were being maintained, that were publicly owned. Actually, the pre-draft of the 2018 report permit actually was going to have a mapping requirement that got pulled from the 2018 and didn't require mapping, but just required a certification that it was being maintained. So the 2023 draft permit is requiring mapping now. And these are the things that have to be mapped: the BMP, or best management practices. BMPs are those basins, the rain gardens, drainage ditches, those type of things. So that's all going to have to be on the map. DEP back in 2018 actually came out with a mapping tool and licenses to ArcGIS and GIS units that they could lend out to municipalities to do the mapping if they wanted to do that. But now the mapping is going to be required versus just a strong suggestion. And I think good, because you should know what you have and you should know where it is. Another component is going to be stream scour. You need to detect, investigate, control, localize scour, caused by your outfalls. Inspect at least 20% or 100 per year, whichever is more, so that throughout this life of the permit, every 5 years, that all of the systems are being inspected. You need to also inspect within 30 days of the creation of a new outfall or receipt of a complaint. So if someone complains that an outfall is causing scour, you need to go out and examine that. You need to ID what the source of the scour is and come up with a remedy within 12 months and do that. It's a discharge. These systems are supposed to collect stormwater, not anything else. So going out in dry weather, figuring out whether your system is discharging something that shouldn't, go back, detect where it's coming from, and eliminating that. And then stormwater training. I think there's a little bit of reinforcement and increased, but municipalities are supposed to be training or having training provided to their planning board and zoning board members, their governing bodies, their public works, engineering, business administrators, so that people understand the obligations the municipality has for stormwater management, the stormwater management rules. Planning boards and zoning boards are approving stormwater management systems for new developments, so they need to understand those requirements, etc. So that's also in the permit. And a lot of this has been in prior permits. And this is the big new thing: watershed improvement plans. This is new. This is something that the environmental community in one shape or form has been asking for, has been commenting on, has been asking DEP to implement for many years. So as you recall earlier on in this presentation, I showed 2 charts from the integrated report where we are not meeting water quality standards. Again, most of that is probably from our land use, our stormwater management. When you don't meet water quality standards, The Clean Water Act says to the state you need to develop what's called a total maximum daily load. In simple terms, a pollution budget. So how much pollution can be discharged into a waterway from all sources and have that waterway meet standards. And then that TMDL, total maximum daily load, that pollution budget, then allocates all of the different sources, an amount of pollution they can legally discharge without violating water quality standards. So you're almost putting, and I know diet is not necessarily a positive term, but you're putting that stream on a diet, and you're trying to go back to the sources, whether it is wastewater treatment plants, industrial facilities, the MS4 system, or others, and reducing their load. Up until this MS4 permit proposal, at least, municipalities haven't necessarily been required through their MS4 system to take that, what's called a waste load allocation, that sort of budget item, line item, and actually implement that. So wastewater treatment plants have been told you need to reduce your discharge of nitrogen or phosphorus by 50%. The wastewater treatment plants install new treatment systems and they reduce their discharge. Municipalities have had a waste load allocation for their stormwater system. And again, pulling the number out of the hat, they have to reduce total suspended solids by 50%. There's a waste load allocation in that TMDL. And municipalities haven't been required to actually implement those reductions. The Watershed Improvement Plan is the way to start doing that. So what DEP in this MS4 permit has laid out is a Watershed Improvement Plan that's going to be implemented in 3 different phases in this permit. The first phase is an inventory report, which is due 36 months after the effective date of this permit. So basically 3 years after January 1st, 2023. Then in 4 years or 48 months, there's going to be a watershed assessment report and then a final watershed improvement plan, basically 1 month before the expiration of this permit. And the objective, as I sort of alluded to, was taking that TMDL and improve water quality by reducing the MS4 contribution to that pollutant. And also, so you have impaired waters. The Clean Water Act says you have to prepare a TMDL. The Clean Water Act doesn't say how long you have to create that TMDL. So there are a lot of impaired waterways that don't have a TMDL. So they're impaired for fecal coliform. They're impaired for TSS or total suspended solids, nitrogen, phosphorus, whatever. But there's not a pollution budget or TMDL for it. So this MS4 permit will tell municipalities, take a look at that integrated report that DEP releases every 2 years, see which of your waterways are impaired, and work towards a goal of improving them without actually having to go and create a TMDL. This is huge. This is new. This is new to New Jersey. Some shape or form of this is in many MS4 permits throughout the country. You may have heard of the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, which is a 5-state TMDL. Those states have worked towards, through their MS4 permit and others, reducing those pollutions and meeting water quality standards. So if you get a sense that I'm really happy and excited about this, that's because it is. There are some problems with it, but it is a positive first step. So, as I said, there's 3 phases to this watershed improvement plan. The first phase is an inventory report. They have 3 years, 36 months to devise, municipalities to devise this. So an inventory of all of their outfalls, something municipalities should already have. The drainage areas for each outfall. So what is the area of land within the municipality, maybe even without the municipality, that outfall collects from and discharges. Where are those outfalls discharging? What water bodies? So, the Stony Brook may have 100 or 200 outfalls. Each municipality is supposed to identify what those outfalls are, where they are discharging. What is the water quality classification of those receiving bodies? So again, for the Stony Brook, there are portions of the Stony Brook that are classified as what's called Category 1 waters, which receive certain protections, certain stormwater treatment levels. There is FW2, just a general FW2 classification for other portions of the Stony Brook. Again, different levels of protections and treatments. But the municipalities are supposed to identify what the waterways are, what their classifications are. If the municipality is connected to the storm source system of another entity, another municipality, identify those connections, what the drainage areas of those interconnections are. And again, municipalities from into another municipality or another municipality into their system, identify them and understand what the drainage areas, what is going into those systems. All of those sort of metally, copper, brownish inlets we see on streets, what are they? Where are they? And where do they go? The areas associated with each TMDL. So those total maximum daily loads are allocated. There is a Raritan Basin TMDL, and that TMDL is broken into some watersheds. Understand what those areas are. The 2018 permit, as I said, didn't require municipalities really to do anything with those TMDLs. The 2018 permit told municipalities, take a look at the TMDLs. They have on their website a TMDL lookup tool. So a municipality can put in their county, the municipality, the tool will list all of the TMDLs associated with that municipality and links to those. So then taking that and understanding what parts of their municipality are impacted by what TMDL. What is the drainage area? What is the area associated with each water quality impairment? So not necessarily a TMDL, but what waters show on that 303D list of the integrated report. The overburdened communities, so environmental justice communities. The municipality is required to identify what parts of their municipality are classified as an overburdened community. Municipalities are supposed to figure out how much impervious surface they have in their municipality, in their waterways. So many municipalities have 2, 3, maybe 4 watersheds. So how much of Hopewell, of Hopewell is in the Stony Brook watershed, how much of that is impervious surface? And then identify the local locality, it should say, and so the location and ownership of all the privately owned systems. So this permit, as I mentioned, is requiring municipalities to map the publicly owned systems, but they also have to identify where and who owns all the privately owned systems. Municipalities have 3 years to do that. So actually, I'm going to do a little bit of editorializing. A lot of this is a mapping exercise. A lot of it is available on GeoWeb already. So the receiving water bodies, the water quality classifications, areas associated with the TMDLs, the overburdened communities, even to some extent the impervious area, pervious surfaces assessment. A lot of that is already available on New Jersey GeoWeb. Some of this maybe require a little more work from municipalities. So my editorializing is, this is great, this is necessary. I'm not sure that it needs to take 3 years to do it. At least for a lot of municipalities. There may be some large municipalities that it may take a little bit longer, but 3 years seems like a long time, at least for me. And my comments will reflect that. So DEP or the municipalities will do this watershed inventory report. They will then come up with a watershed assessment report. So they will identify potential projects and what the potential water quality improvement will be for that. So do they need to retrofit existing basins? Do they need to build new rain gardens to intercept stormwater and clean it, remove some of it from the system? Figure out what the reductions from those systems are going to be and how that's going to impact the TMDL or the impaired water. They're going to have a public participation comment period, 60 days, present these plans, get feedback from the public. And the DEP's permit actually identifies, some of that public, and then estimate what it's going to cost for these projects. Do I need to build new retention basins? Do I need to build rain gardens? And what's going to cost? Where am I going to get that money? Is it going to be from the New Jersey Water Bank, which provides loans and grants? Is it from a stormwater utility? Is it from a 319H grant, which is funding for non-point source pollution from EPA that DEP administers? Is it FEMA? What is the source of these funds? So that DEP has a comfort level, I guess, that these projects can actually happen. And then when are you going to do these projects? Your implementation schedule. So this watershed assessment report is due within 48 months of the issuance of this permit. So basically roughly 4 years, or I have to do math now, December 31st of 2027. And then a final watershed improvement plan report. Summary of the proposed locations and load reductions of your projects that were identified in the assessment report. And these could be both publicly and privately. Are there improvements that privately owned systems can make that will help you meet your water quality goals? A summary of the public comments you received. What regulatory requirements? So if you need to build a basin, you need to retrofit an existing system. Do you need to go to DEP and receive approval to modify an existing stormwater system? Do you have to address riparian zones or stream buffers? Do you need to deal with wetlands, and you may need a wetlands permit? So what permits do you need? Post implementation schedule, a schedule of public information sessions so the public is informed, engaged, and can give feedback. Are there problems that are outside your jurisdiction? So outside of your municipal boundaries that you have no control over? Are there huge amounts of development outside, just upstream of your municipality? They're really causing a lot of your problems, but you can't do anything because they're not in your municipality. And costs of the projects and funding, how you're going to prioritize projects in overburdened communities. So EJ communities have historically received the brunt of our environmental harms and hazards. How are we going to create equity and address those communities so we can give them a leg up, or not even a leg up, but address historic harms and start to address water pollution and flooding in those communities. This is due within 59 months, so December 1st, 2027. Yep, because the next MS4 permit will be January 1st, 2028. Again, I'm going to editorialize a little bit and advocate. I'm the advocacy director. This is the watershed improvement plans, and these 3 phases are great. They are a huge improvement over what existed, but nothing actually is required to be done from an actual boots on the ground, shovels, plants being planted to actually improve water quality during the term of this permit. There's nothing that says to the permittees, you actually have to do something to improve water quality in this 5 years, in this permit term. The length set out for this planning process seems to be a little long, especially given, we are now 18 years into the MS4 program and water quality really is not improving. We may have held the line, we maybe have slowed, but we have not reversed it. Not wait much longer to start to improve water quality. Another sort of issue I see in this, there is the planning, there's the providing of reports, there's no feedback, there's no obligation from the municipalities to take DEP comments and improve their plans. And they have to sort of set out an implementation schedule to implement these plans. Is that 10 years? Is that 15 years? Is that 100 years? Can I propose as a municipality, not that any municipality would ever do this, but I'm going to do all of my projects in year 30. Nothing between years 1 and 29. I'm going to do everything in year 30, and it will be great. There's also nothing in here, and understanding that a lot of this will take years. As I mentioned, the Chesapeake Bay TMDL is over multiple, it has been around since there was 2014 litigation over it, but they are supposed to have all of their projects in place and identified by 2025. So what is sort of the time frame that this permit is looking to get water quality improvements? Understand it's not going to happen during the course of this permit, but we should be setting out in this permit your schedule, your plan should anticipate everything you need to achieve water quality improvements by is it 2028? Is it 2030? Is it 2040? But at least having sort of you must have everything done by X date. So now we have a goal to work towards. We can iterate through in multiple permits so we actually get these improvements. And that sort of brings up there's no iterative process set out in this permit. One would anticipate, the 2028 permit will be better than the 2023 permit, which was better than 2018 permit. But we should have an iterative approach built into this permit that every year, every 2 years, that the municipalities go through this watershed improvement plan, the watershed assessment report, see what they've done, how is that working, is it meeting is it achieving the goals and the reductions we thought they were, and then modify and address and update those plans to account for what's actually happening. So that is what is being proposed here with the watershed improvement plans. It's very good. So that is the bulk of the presentation. I will say we are going to do as the next Technical Friday on May 6th, a whole session on total maximum daily loads. What are they? How are they put together, etc. That is going to be a speaker from DEP. That is probably about 45-50 minutes of the 2023 MS4 permit. So if there are questions,
yeah, there are some questions in this chat.
All right. So there's a question. How long do you think the watershed inventory report should take? Would 1 year be possible or too fast? I think 1 year, as I said, a lot of that information is readily available. Not all of it, I understand not all of it is, but it should be readily available. And I think 1 year would probably be a good time frame to shoot for. As I mentioned, inlet mapping, a lot of municipalities don't have that, so that may take some time. Princeton undertook an exercise, I think it was starting last year, having some interns from Princeton University sitting there with Google Maps in the street view, identifying, pinning all of the inlets and then going out and then truthing it. So it can be done. I think it can be done in a relatively quick period of time. So, 1 year, in my mind, would not necessarily be too short. Maybe there'd be built-in ability for municipalities to phase some of that in. If you have a very large municipality and a lot of inlets, maybe there's some flexibility, but I think a year term, because I really think we should be urging that actual, as I said, boots on the ground, shovels in the dirt, plants being planted should occur during this term. So there are what's called the highway MS4 permit. There is a public facilities MS4 permit. It's not necessarily MS4 permit, but permits. So counties and states, DOT has the public highway, BMP, public facilities, which would be county-owned properties, and others also have their own permits. They're on a slightly different schedule. One thing I didn't mention, the permit we just talked about for the 2023 is the Tier A permit. There's going to be a Tier B permit, but it isn't out yet. And as I said, those Tier B municipalities, there's I think 33 of them, have slightly different standards. There may be 30 of them, 30 municipalities after this permit is issued. So there will be some Tier B municipalities that go into Tier A in this cycle. All right. Comment agreed that 36 months seem excessive, but not certain when a more reasonable time would be. So Michelle Langa suggests maybe 18 with an extension available on a case-by-case basis. Again, it can be outrageous. Providing some flexibility for those large municipalities or under-resourced municipalities that may need help. One person asked, what is the GIS tools we can use to identify the inlets? So a couple, like I said, interns from that worked with the municipality of Princeton used Google Maps in the street view, and then of it. So there might be a car over what might be an inlet. Go out, take a look. There may be some streets that aren't on street view, so you have to go out. As I said, DEP has a program where they have licenses for ArcGIS and handheld GIS units that they will lend out to municipalities. That could be another thing. I can certainly see Green Teams, Boy Scouts, Sustainable Jersey, ECs helping with this process. So Ryan Jarrell says, given that many restoration projects takes years to provide the desired benefit, trees growing slowly, reducing non-point inputs, etc., what could have been some realistic implementation goals of this permit? Yeah, I mean, so that's a really good point, and one of the reasons why I think it's so urgent that we start doing projects and not have this permit be nothing but a planning exercise is it will take a long time to actually do these projects. It will take a long time for these projects sometimes to have an impact. But, for example, could we identify basins we could retrofit? Could we naturalize those basins to provide better nutrient pollution removal? Could we identify basins that need to be fixed and maintained? Can we identify some places where we can restore riparian zones with plantings? Again, not something that will require a lot of time to figure out maybe, and you can actually start to do fairly quickly. So, yeah. So do you know about the changes to the leaf composting? Previously, our composting site was covered in the MS4 permit. Now there appears to be a general permit for those facilities. Yes, I believe, yes, DEP has issued a NGIPTES permit for composting facilities. I'm not very familiar with what is in that, but some of those improvements, I believe, that were in that permit got moved into the municipal waste yard facilities. in this permit. All right. Let's see if I can find the Q&A. I'm not sure if I've identified everything. Is there any other questions?
I did not see. I think something just came in, but besides that, I didn't see any.
All right. So those are all that have been in the chat, and for some reason, I've not been able to see the Q&A. So
Yeah,
everything
Stephen just asked another question.
all right. Do you know about the, okay, we got that. A lot of the proposed improvements seem to be something that stormwater coordinators may not be familiar with. A lot of time it is the director of public works. Are there expert opinions available to give us suggestions of what can be done? So I'm assuming that is with the watershed improvement plans. This is one of those areas where there's going to have to be some thought, and I think DEP is going to have to provide technical resources and guidance. A lot of municipalities do have some very good people. So your public works department likely knows where the flooding issues are, because they've had to go out and clean up the streets. They've had to go out and unclog the storm drains. You know, the police department, you know, knows where those streets are because they've had to go out, or the public works have to go out and close those streets. I mean, so you know where your issues are. It may take a little bit of time to figure out what the source of that issue is. Sometimes it may be obvious. For example, in the assessment report, you're supposed to identify your outfalls and the drainage areas for those outfalls. You know, so it may take a little time to figure out what the drainage areas are. But I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that municipalities can identify for quick fixes that could be done, at least started during this permit period. And again, I hope DEP issues guidance and provides technical resources. You know, so TMDLs, the waste load allocations, you know, they may assign a sub-watershed. Again, one I'm more familiar with, the Carnegie Lake sub-watershed, receives water from multiple municipalities. It has a waste load allocation reduction. How municipalities to sort of figure out what their allocation of the allocation is. That is something that DEP probably can provide guidance and technical resources that help municipalities figure that out going forward. And you also have multiple watershed groups throughout the state that have a lot of technical resources and understanding, and they can be there to help as well via voice. Right.
Alfie did just ask a question in
All right.
Since you can't see it, I'll just read it out to you. It says,
Nope.
What resources can we put together to support municipalities that are time and resource constrained to help them comply with these new requirements?
That is a really good question. And we are working, I mean, I've been thinking about that ever since this permit came out. You know, the Watershed Institute has been running a green infrastructure training course. So how to design, install, and maintain these systems. Could we provide better resources on how to maintain stormwater systems? But, you know, identifying, again, some of those low-hanging fruit and projects. The very first picture on this presentation was of floating wetlands to help address nutrient pollution that are causing HABs. So, you know, those are some of the resources we can do. A lot of watershed groups and other organizations have training on reviewing site plans and stormwater management, making sure that these systems are being designed and approved so that they actually function. You know, many of us are driving around when we see stormwater basins that aren't functioning, flagging those and making sure that the municipalities know so they can go back and see what's going on and fixing them. You know, so as I probably mentioned, you know, a good portion of our water pollution problem is systems that just aren't functioning anymore because they weren't maintained, or for whatever reason they got damaged. There was a picture I had earlier on in the presentation of a basin with water. If you really look carefully, the concrete low flow channel was underwater, but it was also, there was a little mini Grand Canyon alongside. So there has been significant erosion going on in that basin, and that basin has existed that way for a number of years without any change. There's a basin that I, by my house very regularly that is owned by DOT that doesn't drain in 72 hours. That concrete low flow channel is filled with sediment and grass and dirt. It's actually probably providing water quality benefits because there is vegetation in there that is slowing down the release of that water. Can you remove those concrete low flow channels? So those things were designed for flood reduction, flood retention, but not water quality. So those smaller storms just go through those low flow concrete channels and doesn't receive really any treatment. So can we break up some of those concrete, naturalize those basins, and you not only provide a flood reduction benefit, but you also provide water quality treatment. So there's a lot of things we as an environmental community need to think about and be ready to help guide, educate, and identify issues for the municipalities. We have a couple more minutes, so there's additional questions. Take them, give it a few more. I'm going to leave this up here. So we will be, again, sending out the recording of this session for everyone who has registered. Remember that on May 6th is our next technical Friday, where we'll be talking about total maximum daily loads. So I think this is really the key, because now we're going to be implementing a good portion of the TMDLs. So we now need to understand what goes into a TMDL, what are they, and how we can use those. All right, leave it open for a little bit longer if anyone has any more questions or comments.
We did get something in the Q&A, I think a
Yep.
response to what you were saying before as well, just a comment. It was, we could educate the municipalities on the benefit moving forward to make sure the new projects have GI and not exceptions.
Yeah, so that is interesting. Green infrastructure as of March or April of 2021 should be the rule, not the exception. The green infrastructure rule was adopted in March of 2020, gave municipalities up to 1 year to adopt ordinances to implement that green infrastructure. So municipalities should be requiring green infrastructure as part of the development process. If there are exceptions, that's a variance and requires additional stuff from municipalities. One of the things to understand, and we should be past this point, but a lot of development applications were submitted before that March 2021 date, but heard afterwards. So we, in April 1st of 2022, there should be no more projects going before a planning board or zoning board that fall under the old rules. Thing that sort of is intuitive, but most people don't think about it, and it took me a while to understand. You may see projects going in the ground today that were approved years ago, but just never got around to being built, and now are being built. So they may be built and approved under an old set of ordinances. But projects that are going forward should be green infrastructure, small, decentralized systems, not large detention basins, infiltration basins off in the corner of a development project. Also, just to keep on your radar, the Department of Environmental Protection will be issuing the NJPAC rules, protecting against climate threats. This will be a series of changes to the flood hazard, freshwater wetlands, coastal rules, as well as some additional changes to the stormwater rules. Maybe those new rules will be proposed in June of this year. So keep your eye out on that. But get your comments into DEP on this MS4 permit, as quickly as possible. Technically, the deadline is today, but DEP will still consider them. The sooner you get those comments in, the easier DEP can review them and incorporate them. Please support DEP where they've done good things. So the watershed, improvement plans are good. They can be better. Requirements. Again, I mentioned those were a requirement or a proposal from the 2018 rule that got pulled out. We need to support DEP to keep those in. Kind of hard to maintain and inspect where you don't know where they are. So with that, if there are no other questions, I appreciate everyone's attention and participation. And I look forward to seeing everyone back on May 6th for TMDLs. If anyone has any questions about this permit after this session, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Again, thank you very much, and everyone have a good day.
Mike, before you log off, Avery did have a question in the chat.
Okay. All right. Stormwater operator's license. How do I feel about them? What I believe is we need to figure out how to maintain these systems. We're designing them. Let's assume we're designing them correctly. Let's assume they're being constructed correctly. They're clearly not being maintained. We need to get a handle on why they are not being maintained and figure out how to enforce that. I don't know if it's an operator's license. I don't know if better teeth in the municipalities' stormwater ordinances to really ensure that the O&M manuals are being followed. I don't know if it is DEP enforcement or municipal enforcement going out and spot checking some of these systems in the audit and the inspection and maintenance reports. But we do need to get a handle on that and get that fixed. I do think we also need to get better training on stormwater management and the stormwater ordinances, what the requirements are, so that when land use boards, planning boards, and zoning boards who are volunteers and are trying to do their best, really understand what these systems are supposed to be doing and whether they're meeting them. One of the things I see time and time again, so our stormwater rules are, you are supposed to address quality, quantity, and recharge. There's a misunderstanding that when the stormwater rules say I am reducing the quantity, that they're actually reducing the volume. What quantity in the stormwater rules refer to is peak rate reductions. I am, when these systems are being designed, they are reducing how fast the stormwater is running off the site, not really dealing with quantity, what we would consider quantity, how much is running off. The rules, by and large, don't deal with. They deal with how fast, but I can't tell you how many planning board members have said, no, that's not right. It is, they're reducing how much is running off. And that's just plainly wrong. And I have seen this less and less, but I have seen applicants, engineers tell the planning boards, you don't have to worry about the stormwater management because DEP is going to look at it. No, the planning boards under the MS4 permit and the municipal land use law have primary responsibility to ensure that these things are going to work and are going to do what they're supposed to do. DEP, Bird said, believes they see less than 50% of the development applications in the state. So if it doesn't impact wetlands, flood hazard, coastal zone, waterfront development, if it doesn't require a DEP permit, DEP doesn't necessarily see the application. So I'm hoping some of the improvements in this MS4 permit and some of the work the environmental community and others can do can help municipalities who have limited resources, limited time, and limited money can really get a better handle and get better approvals, better systems designed, and better maintenance. So that was a very long-winded answer to Avery's question. I'll again leave for just a little bit longer to see if there's any more. All right. Well, I think we are done. Again, I appreciate everyone attending. Hopefully this was informative, and I will see everyone on May 6th regarding total maximum daily loads. Have a good day.